I hope you are enjoying today's Anti-420 event with Johnny's Ambassadors. We have another incredible speaker with us today. We are halfway there, so thank you for sticking with us. Ed Shemelya is the National Marijuana Initiative Coordinator for the High Intensity Drug Traffic Area Program, or HIDTA. He has a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice, and he has been speaking on legalization in America, understanding hemp and marijuana, and current affairs in marijuana since 2013. Ed, thank you so much for our new friendship, for your support, for involving me in the NMI Speakers Bureau, and now for being one of Johnny's ambassadors. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Laura. I'm honored to be here today. And like I said, before we got started, I'll publicly thank you for allowing me to participate in your event, but privately I'll cuss you for having to follow Livy, as she's absolutely brilliant. And I told Dale when I found out I was following Livy that there's going to be brilliance followed by Dumb and Dumber. So, I'm sorry to all your folks that are watching that you got this hillbilly from Kentucky that's going to talk to you for the next 30 minutes on the status of marijuana in America. When I started in law enforcement with the Kentucky State Police in 1979, marijuana was, and for all intent and purposes, a relatively benign, harmless substance, unless you were a young person with a developing brain. When we're talking about potencies during that time, between 0.5%, maybe 2 or 3%. And if you could score some hash oil that was 6 or 8 or 10%, you really had some really good stuff. But in reality, that's not where we are today. When you look at this picture here on the left, the derivatives that are available to the consumer in this country are amazing and virtually unrecognizable when I started in law enforcement in 1979. But make no mistake about it, what this is really all about in this country is nothing more than chasing the God Almighty dollar here in this industry. And what we're going to try to do today is kind of give you a look at where we think this movement is going with respect to what's happening in the 117th Congress and federally, look at the state level. But in order to do that, we first have to give you a brief history lesson on where we came from. And I show this because we are talking on Anti-420 Day, but it is 420, and all across America today, there are literally tens of thousands of young people that are gathering to celebrate marijuana, for lack of a better word. And, I think a lot of folks don't really understand the origin of 420. And you look at this circle here and you look at this picture, and this is actually your state capitol in 2017. And I have used this picture for 4 years now, and I've never recognized this elderly gentleman that's at the bottom that I had circled here. And as Dale says, this isn't Colorado afternoon fog at 4:20 p.m. And this is a whole bunch of sick Coloradoans here all around your state capitol. And that haze is marijuana smoke. And this elderly gentleman has to be sitting here thinking, this sure isn't what it was when I started back in the 60s or 70s, and nothing could be further from the truth. And you look at where we are today, the history of 420 is actually a lot different. It wasn't a day, it was basically a time. And when you think about 420, April the 20th, it wasn't thousands of people, but rather it was 5. And it was 5 high school students that started this thing in San Rafael, California, that used 420 as a code for a time to meet. And I don't know if there's any symbolism that was intended by this, at a statue of Louis Pasteur at 4:20 p.m. to smoke weed. And I think it's kind of symptomatic or problematic, however you want to look at it, that one of the most prominent scientists and chemists of the 19th century that led to innovations that created a lot of our abilities to sustain foods for long periods of time, they're meeting in a statue. And we talk about how the confluence of science and marijuana have been so contorted and convoluted that we don't really understand it or have been misrepresented by this movement. I don't know that these 5 kids had any idea that they were smoking dope in front of a statue of a famous scientist that we would have this issue 40 years later. But I don't think they even envisioned that what they started in 1971 would evolve into the event that 420 is today. And I want you to remember, it wasn't a day, it was a time. But when you look at this, again, let's take a look at where we are today and understand where we are today is almost 50 years. And I say over 40 years, but it's closer to 50 years in the making. And when we started this movement, it was driven principally by three organizations. The first is the Drug Policy Alliance. And I'm using their own terminology here. And they basically say it's time to take a new approach. We ground in science where compassion, health, and human rights are at the forefront. The DPA is more of a global entity, and essentially what their ultimate goal is the legalization of all drugs for recreational use. I'll speak a little bit more about that in a minute. The next group is the Marijuana Policy Project, the MPP, which I actually think is the most dangerous group in America because they are the ones that are working at the state level to actually change legislation. They have a motto, money goes in, policy change comes out. And I'll be honest with you, that motto is actually held true these last 30 plus years. And then we have NORML, the organization that started it all, working to reform marijuana laws both medically and non-medically since 1970. When you look at these three groups, and Dale and I talk, you got to know your enemy, you got to understand your enemy, but you also have to acknowledge that they have kicked our butts for the last 40 years. And they've done so because they're laser focused and mission driven. And their mission has been to legalize marijuana, and they've done so very well. They're well funded, they're well organized. Like I said, they're singularly laser focused in their mission. And I'll give you an idea of just, we look at what we're doing, and I'll speak about NMI is one of the three national initiatives that support our 33 HIDTAs across the country. We're marijuana subject matter experts. And we basically are focused from grant cycle to grant cycle in a 1-year cycle. And I was in San Francisco in 2015 giving a presentation, and the DPA coordinator for the state of California, gal's name was Amanda Raymond. She spoke right after I did. And that evening at dinner, she came down, and unfortunately, I was sitting by myself, so she walks herself over, and we start talking. And I am sitting there in January of 15 trying to look at what we're going to do at NMI is going to do in 15. Very little thought to what we were going to be doing in 16 and 17. And I started talking to Amanda, and I asked her, I said, what's the plan for DPA in 15? She said, hey, we had that planned out in 12. We are working on our strategic plan for 18, 19, and 20 as I speak right now. And this was January of 2015. And I said, oh yeah, what's contained in that? She said, we're gonna legalize psychedelics in California. We're gonna legalize psychedelics in Colorado. And our end game is on the West Coast. We're gonna have one state that removes all criminal penalties for simple possession of all illicit substances. And guess what? They did exactly that. Denver legalized psilocybin mushrooms. San Francisco did. In Oregon in 20, decriminalize simple possession of all illicit substances. My point being is these folks are looking strategically, and they're looking out into the future, not next year, next month, but they're looking years ahead, and they're strategically mapping out a roadmap to how to get where they want to go. And you have to give them kudos for a job well done, because they have kicked our butts at every turn. However, you have to understand they have been well funded, something of which we have not. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But you look at today and where we are today. I throw this graphic up. This was used in New Jersey last year. And the question here is, big tobacco, do you really want marijuana, or are we sure? Let me tell you something, folks. We already have big marijuana. It already exists, and it is exercising tobacco's playbook in every shape, form, and fashion. The three groups that I spoke of in the previous slide, basically in the last couple of years, and principally since Colorado did what they did in 12 and enacted in 13, have replaced these three as the principal drivers for the change of marijuana policy, not only at the state level, but also at the local level. So it's essentially right now it's industry driven, and they're doing it by literally billions of dollars that they're making every year. So when you look at where we are, this is really about the commercialization of THC. And that's essentially what we're talking about. When we look at this and we look at 34 medical states, 15 full, and I hate this term recreational, because I don't know about you folks in Colorado or the rest of you that are tuning in, but us hillbillies, when we talk about recreation in Kentucky, we're talking about hiking, biking, hunting, fishing, stuff that actually is beneficial to the mind and body. And in my mind, recreationally using marijuana does none of that, does not fit that criteria. So I hate this term, and I don't use it, but I put it here because that's the nomenclature that they're using. But this is really about the commercialization of THC. Then you throw on the fact that we have 47 hemp states, and the nightmare that industrial hemp is, because make no bones about it, hemp and marijuana aren't cousins, they're identical twins. And the only thing is an arbitrary THC designation of 0.3% or less makes it an agricultural commodity as opposed to a Schedule I substance. What's alarming is that conservative projections for this industry in 2021 are between 20 and $30 billion. And I had an old instructor in an organized crime class to try to show you the distinction between a million and a billion. And I love her illustration, and I'll use it so you can understand what kind of money I'm talking about here. For all of you that are on this call, I'm going to give you $1 million with one caveat. You have to spend $1,000 a day until your million is exhausted. You will exhaust that $1 million in 2 3/4 years. The same thing, I'm going to give each of you $1 billion with the same caveat. You must spend $1,000 a day. It will take you 2,750 years to spend your $1 billion at $1,000 a day. Kind of puts that in context, just how big this business is. And I'm not even talking about the black market that exists in every one of these 34 and 15 states that have either medicalized or commercialized marijuana. This is a huge cash cow for this addiction industry. I used to call this, when we were doing indoor grow investigations, you find a grow ops like this. This is a sea of weed, and we are basically a nation awash in a sea of weed right here, with more to come. So where are we at, or what are we looking at? Basically, these are industries of addiction. We all know these industries: tobacco, the alcohol industry, and the pharmaceutical industry. And essentially, as we have seen, and me from Appalachia, we've seen the industry on your right, the pharmaceutical industry with OxyContin, enslave a generation of Appalachians with addiction to OxyContin and then on to heroin. But basically, what we have are addiction industries that place profit over people. There's nothing really new about this. Alcohol and tobacco have been around since this country's inception. The pharmaceutical industry for the last 50 to 70 years in some degree and form, but more importantly, the last 20 to 30 years have taken a predominant role. And I guess in the last 20 years, when pain actually became the fifth vital sign, the pharmaceutical industry, and we've seen demonstrated placing profit over people. So, and then you add this, the fourth new addiction industry into this that cares nothing about people and wholly about profit. And here we are. This is the MPP map. And I would encourage you, if you're not already doing this, go to their websites, MPP, DPA, and NORML. There, if you're going to understand what's going on and what their mindset is, they're free to tell you. I am a regular subscriber to all three of them under a covert name, and get daily briefings from all three of them as to what they're doing. And it's a great way to get intel. But this kind of shows you the landscape, according to MPP, you'll see these white states, mine, Kentucky being one of them. However, what they don't tell you, with the exception of Idaho here, all the rest of these are CBD states, including my state. But make no bones about it, they are doing everything in their power to try to medicalize marijuana in these states. And they've already been successfully at decriminalize it to my state, to the point where now, if you're in possession of less than 16 ounces of marijuana, it's a citable offense, not jailable anymore. So basically you can have almost up to a pound and all you're going to get is a citation. So we have legitimately, or what, however you want to use the term, decriminalized marijuana across this country, either statutorily with respect to punitive action, or either medically or commercially. But here's where we are. So what's next? I anticipate fully that the states that do not have this are going to continue to see an onslaught, not only of funding, but of efforts. And I'll kind of give you an illustration of what is happening and what has happened in the states that have already done that, make it so much more difficult for us in the states that are fighting this to keep it out, because they have learned and they continue to apply what they learn as they evolve legislation to make it more palatable. But more importantly, what we are seeing in my state is a level of funding to state legislators at unprecedented levels from the marijuana industry. And guess what? They do not reside in my state. They're from your state. They're from Michigan. They're from Illinois. They're from states that have already done that, are looking for a new venture capital opportunity in my Commonwealth. And quite frankly, I don't want your sorry butts in my state, and we're doing everything we can to keep them out of my state. But it makes it so much more difficult. We fought it off this year. I suspect, as the Senate majority leader told me just a few weeks ago, that he doesn't know how we're going to keep it out next year. So it makes it much more difficult as they continue to erode away medically. And let's first lay this on the line. There's nothing medical about this drug in its crude form, either as medicine or a medical delivery device. So we need to stop this discussion, the medicalization of marijuana, and talk about it for what it is, the commercialization, THC. This second in the MORE Act, and I don't know if you're familiar with it, it passed out of the House in the 116th Congress, went over to the Senate and died over there. Now we know the Senate has changed hands, both Democrat control on both sides. The MORE Act has been reintroduced. It's the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act. Essentially, what's critical about this component, it removes marijuana from the schedule altogether. Basically treats it and allows the states to treat it much as they treat alcohol and tobacco. So essentially what the MORE Act would do is remove marijuana as a Schedule I substance, remove it from the schedule altogether. It sets up programs to expunge old cannabis-related convictions, so basically wiping away any conviction previously under the guise of social equality, and basically sets up a taxing mechanism at the federal level and gives disenfranchised communities an opportunity to get a piece of the industry, which is astounding of itself. When you look at industries of addiction and where they tend to locate their facilities, whether it be alcohol, tobacco, or now marijuana, you look at Denver, you look at Phoenix, and what we've looked at NMI, and Dale Quigley, who you'll hear from a little later on. Basically, we looked at zip codes that were at or below the 2010 poverty level and mapped those zip codes out. And then we looked at, from the Marijuana Enforcement Division, looked at licensings based on zip code, and 79% of your dispensaries are located in those zip codes that were at or below the poverty level in Denver. 82% of them in Phoenix were located in zip codes at or below the poverty level in Denver. If that does not tell you something, then the question I ask people, if you're so concerned about social equity, why are we allowing addiction industries, regardless of what the addictive substance is, in our communities are disenfranchised? That's the bigger question we should be asking. This has real traction, and the reason it does is because marijuana's principal lobbyist on the Hill is John Boehner, the former Speaker of the House, a Republican. And he is doing all in his power to see that marijuana is legalized or removed from the schedule because he has a $20 million bonus at stake should he be successful at pulling this off. In addition to that, there are 89 other bills related to cannabis in Congress right now, in the 117th Congress, and not one stinking bill seems to rein in or tighten controls over cannabis whatsoever. So why the concern? This is why, and this is courtesy of my friend Monty Stiles. The money that is being generated by this industry is absolutely astounding. Monty put in a lot of work here, and I just call your attention to Oregon. In 2020, you look at $21.3 million to legalize drugs in Oregon, and that's to remove them from simple possession from penalty. This industry is a cash cow, and they are putting in tons of money to effect change, and they are being very successful. This is why we should be concerned. Another reason you need to be concerned is because it doesn't matter where we go in this country. When we legalize this substance, we see some common areas of concern, and that's why we call them common issues, common concerns. And public health issues, and you probably already heard about potency. You're probably tired of hearing about potency, but let me tell you something. What has happened, I guess thankfully, because of what Colorado has done, is we have seen marijuana THC potency explode since 2012. This drug is evolving so quickly, and we're not talking about, when you look at market share, less than 35% of the market share is the raw bud, the flower that you would roll and smoke. 65% of market share is something other than that. When we're talking about concentrates, to dab, waxes, tinctures, distillates, vaping, edibles, all of these products that have the ability and the tendency and are usually high potency products. Potency is driving all of the issues that we're dealing with: usage rates, treatment recovery issues. When you look at public safety issues, impaired driving, when you do this, these are some of the things that we see in every instance that nobody's really addressing, and some of the concerns we need to be discussing and other topics. And the last one is the fact that nobody is effectively regulating this to mitigate any of these consequences that are listed here. Colorado is touted as the model for effective regulation, and we kind of scratch our head and look at that, because I think effective regulation of marijuana is kind of oxymoronic. It's like talking about jumbo shrimp and happily married, two phrases that don't normally associated with each other. But nobody's doing a good job of regulating this substance, not only with respect to potency, but to mitigate any of, and they call them unintended consequences, but I think the industry had every intention of these consequences occurring with respect to potency and usage rates, because they're going up in the 12 to 17, 18 and 25 and 26 and above, and particularly with 55 and older. And at 26 and above, that's one of the fastest growing segments of marijuana users in this country. And it's alarming what is happening with respect to potency, because nobody really understands. And you have to put this in context of something, when you look about marijuana, and as I talk to policymakers across the country, they're my age or older, 60 plus and older, and their perception of marijuana is what it is when they experienced it. And it's not the reality where today's marijuana really is. So this is what we see across the spectrum. Nobody's immune from it. Nobody has done anything to effectively mitigate any of this. So let's summarize this. And I don't really know, Laura, where I am on time. I think I'm getting close, but what are we going to do about this? And when you look at marijuana use, it is increasing. And when you listen to the movement, they seem poised for ultimate victory. And, right now, I would probably have to agree with their assessment. But that being said, we have to understand that we're dealing with a for-profit addiction industry. And when we're doing that, we've got to start following the money. And we have to start rattling chains and by following the money, and let us show people where the money's actually going to, because money right now with this industry is influencing policy. It's not science that's driving public health and public safety policy with respect to this drug. It is money that is driving public health and public safety policy with respect to this drug. Legalization has led to more research, and that research is actually showing that, cannabis use has some serious consequences. And fortunately, we have started to see some slow pushback in a lot of areas. When you look at Colorado, when you look at California, almost 80% of California counties have some sort of moratorium or stopped letting new dispensaries come in. So I say all along, if there's anything good that's come out of legalization, is we actually are doing more research right now, not only into the potential benefit medically of cannabis, but also more importantly to the consequences of cannabis. And we've got to allow science a chance to catch up to the rhetoric that's being perpetuated by the industry here. So that's one of the good things that's happening. The research I've already alluded to in all areas, the body, the mind, the economy, the environment, public safety, public health, it's something you could throw in there, but this is all research that's out there, that's emerging, and it's going to help us, but it takes time. You got to understand that this didn't happen overnight, and it's not going to end overnight. We're almost 50 years to get here, and unfortunately, we're not going to wave a wand and make this go away anytime. Unfortunately, I think we're probably going to take a generation. And the sad reality is that nobody knows how many young lives we're going to actually lose before this country wakes up and has its epiphany moment and looks back. And I say, every time I do a presentation, I will be on the brown side of grass most likely when that occurs. But I also know that I have to be on the right side of history when it does occur, that I've done my level best to try to actually make a small difference in this fight. And we have got to persevere, and we got to keep moving. And we can't sit on the sidelines. Everybody, and I'm going to tell you something about this movement. I have done complex criminal investigations into multinational drug trafficking organizations that have treated me with more kindness and respect than the marijuana industry has treated me. They're some of the most vicious and folks that I've had the misfortune of dealing with these last 10, 12 years. But you cannot sit on the sidelines and hope that Ed or Dale or Laura or Libby or Ben Cord or Monty Stiles is going to do this for you. We caused this mess by not doing anything, but I know we can fix this mess. And in order to do that, we've got to stop this infighting on our side. And what I see and have continued to see is a siloing of best practices and processes that occur within our DFCs and prevention groups. It's not about, one of the great things about HIDTA, it's not about who gets the credit. Ronald Reagan, it's amazing what can they can accomplish when nobody cares about who gets the credit. And we have got to stop the siloing of best practices and processes. And we got to stop this infighting. We can't give a crap who gets the credit, because that's not what we're here about, and that's not what we're fighting for. We may need to actually re-examine and retool our approaches on this topic. I listened to the last part of Libby's, and I'm a firm believer that we have to start reaching our kids the minute they hit elementary school, and we can't stop talking to our kids till they get out of high school. I think education has to be, and with respect to drug demand education, or whatever you want to call it, has to be a part of our core curriculum in our schools across this country. And we can't just wait till they get in middle school until we hit them. We have to start doing it, and we've got to educate parents. And I don't know that what we're doing or how we're doing it has been an effective mechanism, but we really need to do some internal assessments and re-examine and retool our approach. And we need to stop calling this crap medicalization for medical marijuana, because that's not what this is all about. This is a focus on the commercialization of THC and CBD to a lesser extent. And this is the reality of where everything goes. What we see is a state that once they medicalize now are 2 to 3 years in recreation. What took California 15 years, Colorado about 10 years, is now taking a state 2 to 3 years to go from medical to commercial. Because why? As you see in Colorado, there's 4 million more commercial patients than there are the 1 million medical patients in that state. So let's call it for what it is. Stop the farce of medicalization, and let's talk about the commercialization of THC and CBD. So why are we here? And I'll borrow a phrase from another brilliant woman, Dr. Bertha Madras from Harvard. She basically said, this is not a war against drugs. It's the defense of our children's minds, brains, health, and thus our community's future. Now, I don't know about you, but this is why I'm here. This is why I do this every day. These 5 wonderful human beings are my grandkids. And this is who the industry's after. This is their target. Make no mistake about it. I don't make any bones about it. If they can addict these young people, they have lifelong customers. Just what they want. This is who is being targeted by their advertisements, by their social media messaging. And these are my grandkids. And I'm going to tell you something. They're not going to get them. And they're not going to get your kids. They're not going to get your neighbor's kids if we have anything to do about it. And this is why I do what I do every day. And this is why you should care, because this is the real target of this industry. And I'm going to leave you with a quote from one of my favorite authors. And Mark Twain said a lot of things. And one of my favorite quotes is, never argue with stupid people, because they'll bring you down to their level, then beat you with experience. And I find that to be true with a lot of folks that believe a lot of this crap about marijuana. But this is a more salient quote to what we're talking about today. What gets us into trouble is not what we don't know. What gets us into trouble, it's what we know for sure that just ain't so. And let me tell you something, folks, there's just so much about this drug that just ain't so. And we need to call it for that. We need to throw the BS flag on BS and not be afraid to stand up to what science and what research is telling us about cannabis. And how can you do that? You can go to our website. Here's some resources for you. There's a QR code. It'll take you straight to the website. Host of information, research that's coming out there. And here's my contact information with a link to a survey that I appreciate you take if you have the opportunity. Don't hesitate to reach out to me. Dale will be following along shortly. We're here as a resource to you. We're kind of like Bubba on Forrest Gump. We mainly just know marijuana. And so we're the resident experts for marijuana. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. And with that, Laura, I'm pretty much done. That's it. I think I hit the 30-minute mark right on. That's amazing that I was able to do that.
You did almost exactly.
Well,
I
you told me to do so.
I said I was going to threaten you with every inch of your life. You got to finish at 30 minutes. I was ringing you.
I've never been spoken to so harshly by an organizer that I had 30 minutes. And I usually tell them, hey, Jackie, I'm going to talk to you. You have to sing
about these things. I just have these efficiency quirks, little idiosyncrasies about time. But see, it's running perfectly. So hey, it's got to be working. Thank you, Ed. You're getting amazing comments and feedback. Wonderful. Thank you. Love your passion. Thank you for what you do to help us. You do have some questions, and I would love to just see what you have found out there today on 420. We are launching our Johnny's Ambassadors online marijuana curriculum for teens and a parallel program for adults, because we could not find education when we started Johnny's Ambassadors. So we thought, you know what, we're going to make it ourselves. Looking at your 5 grandkids, we have to reach them. We have to get the kids watching TikTok videos, on their beds. And we're hoping to raise funds to get some advertising and some marketing people who can help us, where they can click in and go take this training and learn about the harms of marijuana and make it fun and engaging, and not hear from people like me and you. They want to hear from their peers
Yes.
saying, this stuff is real. Don't do it. It hurt me. And so that's the project that we're working on, because I think we do need a different way of educating. We're trying to do direct to teen, because I just couldn't find it. Have you, it's always like an adult needs to stand up there and give a PowerPoint and, wah, 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 it kind of lecture to people. So how are you talking to your grandkids? How old were they when you said elementary school? When you first start talking to one of those babies, how old are they going to be? How do you even
Well,
know where to begin?
I start talking to each of them when they go to kindergarten.
Kindergarten.
Yes,
Kindergarten.
I started
Wow.
kindergarten. We have a discussion every year, and we've been working with CADCA and the Youth Leadership Forum within CADCA, and we
Yes.
have a youth focus group, and we're talking to kids about, what kids are telling us year after year is, look, we don't want to be scared. We want to be told the truth.
Right.
Yeah. And they want anecdotal stories that they can relate to. And they
Okay.
want them in the platforms that they're paying attention to. And what we've learned from these kids is you got about 15 to 20 seconds to catch them.
Wow.
If you can catch them in that 15 to 20 seconds, they'll pay attention to you. So we're trying to craft, and you have to hit them in the platform, because here's what most people don't understand. If you've got a child, and the young lady that you saw there, my granddaughter and my grandson, they're now 17 and 15. That picture was taken a couple of years ago, and they're all over social media. And if you have a child that's on social media, and if you don't, then God bless you. I don't know how you kept them off of it. But if they're interested in weed, they're getting between 40 and 60 impressions a day on marijuana from an industry that's trying to entice them to use marijuana. If we're not countering that message, and all they're hearing is it's medicine, it's not harmful. And I get this all over the country as we speak to kids. Well, if it wasn't medicine, why would they wouldn't have passed it if it wasn't medicine. So it can't be harmful for me because it's medicine. A doctor has to recommend it. And
Right.
that logic is astounding. But you can't wait till middle school to start talking to these kids, because, as Libby already said, there's something about eighth and ninth graders that, you know, if they're there and they understand it, they already got it. I think what you're doing is brilliant by trying to run a companion program, because what I found is these kids know much more than their parents about the reality of today's marijuana. Is how do
Yeah.
we reach adults to help them to understand that what their experience was with marijuana isn't the reality of what their kids are experiencing with today's marijuana? Because they might have lit one up in college, but that's not what kids are initiating on. They're dabbing, they're using vapes, and they may have lit one up in college in 1970. It's been a 0.5%, 2%. Their kids are initiating with a dab that's 70, 80, 90%,
Yeah.
or they're vaping at 30, 40, 50%. So
Yep.
they're running two parallel paths. The kids are understanding one thing, they don't know, they can't separate facts from myths, and parents have no clue what they're talking about when we talk about today's marijuana. So they can't relate to what their kids. Then you have that impression with adults. But well, look at me, I did weed. Look at former President Obama.
Yeah.
Hey, I
Didn't hurt
smoked
me.
marijuana. Look at me, I'm the president of the United. He actually did that in an Instagram chat that he was having with kids. Hey, I smoked weed. I'm the president of the United States. Well, I guarantee you, if he was dabbing in college, what these kids are dabbing today, he would be on the south side of Chicago begging for nickels and dimes instead of the president of the United States.
That's
So
right.
he has no idea, or had no idea when he made that statement, the reality of today's marijuana.
Yes, and I remember not even a year ago when I was doing just getting started with Johnny's Ambassadors, talking to parents and putting up a post about 420 Day and what it was, and that Johnny was dabbing. Uh, I've never seen anything like it since then, and hadn't to that day, but it got 20,000 shares.
Yep.
20,000 shares. And guess what people were saying? What are you talking about? I
Yes.
have no idea what you mean. I put a couple links about dabbing and what is dabbing, and that was what it was I don't know what you're talking about. So if nothing else, I feel like we're really trying to educate people about the realities of what their kids are seeing, because it's out there. And I hope this has been shocking, your
Yeah,
presentation,
I
for
think
some people.
one of the things we've got to do, Laura, is, we educate, educate, educate. Well, when you leave out of here, what are you going to do with it? And I
Right? We
think
need to
that's part of the
execute,
missing
execute,
link right
execute.
there that we've got to do. Is it's one thing to empower you with knowledge, but if you take it and you just keep it right here, or you don't try to do anything to affect change with it, then I've wasted my time, and so have you.
Right.
So what we've got to do when we start to educate and empower people is be able to give them the tools to take that to the next step,
Right.
and
Well,
making
and
sure that our groups are doing everything they can. They're leveraging their influence. They have all the right actors at the table that need to be there in order to do that. I don't think we're effectively doing that right now.
well, having 30 years prior to this happening, with my expertise in productivity, I get frustrated many times by what seems to be a lack of organization, a lack of follow through, a lack of effort. It's
Mm-hmm.
not sometimes that we don't know what to do. It's just that we don't have the mobility and the forces in that driving forward like a lot of the pro marijuana people do. So we're going to have to have a very strong call to action, and get moving with the same urgency and force and determination that they are. So yes, I believe that it's very true. We've got to have that execution. The productivity piece is huge. Okay, can you give us a little more on hemp? Someone asks.
Okay. Well, that's a whole presentation in of itself,
Yeah,
particularly
give us
what
like a
happened in
minute synopsis.
well, what happened in the 2018 Farm Bill is they inserted the hemp provision in there, and essentially what happened with the hemp provision in the 2018 Farm Bill is it actually removed hemp from the schedule. So hemp at and they set an arbitrary THC distinction of 0.3% or less is now considered an agricultural commodity.
Right.
I come from a state that most people don't realize illicitly we're the second most prolific marijuana producing state in the nation, second only to California.
Hmm.
But we were one of the nation's most prolific hemp producers from this nation's inception up until the Second World War. I have looked at millions and millions of illicit marijuana plants, and I can take you to the University of Kentucky's hemp farm, and visually there's no way to distinguish it. The problem with hemp right now is they're genetic clones with a arbitrary THC distinction, but we don't have the ability to test hemp at the field level. So there's no, outside of doing quantitative analysis, we have to rely on quote unquote. And how the problem in Kentucky is 85% of our quote unquote legitimate hemp growers used to be the same illicit marijuana growers. And now they're growing an agricultural commodity that law enforcement can't touch. It looks, smells, and is identical to the illicit product they were growing before the hemp. That's a whole different presentation. It's creating, but here's the scary part of what hemp did. It gave the legal marijuana industry access to the banking system through an agricultural commodity. And that's essentially, I think, what they wanted. They couldn't do it because marijuana is still a Schedule One. Now, if they have LLCs and they're running hemp production, that's a perfect way to commingle and access the banking system through the hemp portion of that. So it's brilliant. You just got to give them credit. They're absolutely brilliant.
Well, we're going to have to find some really brilliant PR and marketing and lobbyists on our side, which I think, we're really working on. At least in Colorado, we're starting to see a really great coalition come together with our allied partners. And we've just got to figure a way to get our fundraising in place and make as big of a stink as they are. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us. So many issues you talked about, and it's a little overwhelming. What about environmental consequences of grow operations, the carbon footprint, violent crime? Do you have some, we only have a couple minutes left here, but do you see some of?
When you look at marijuana you look at in Colorado that the carbon emissions from the industry is growing 5% a year. When you look at the carbon and you look at what's happening in California with grows that we're seeing heavy metals and banned pesticides, carbofurans that are showing up in marijuana that's being sold commercially. When you look at marijuana and you talk about you have a problem with water in your state, this is a water thirsty plant that consumes between 6 and 9 liters per plant per day.
Well, no wonder.
No wonder. And you look at the energy consumption and what the this industry is doing to the overtaxed electrical grids in this country. It's a huge energy hog. It's a huge water hog. And I can almost assure you that even the best case circumstances in your production facilities, molds and fungicides exist because they exist in all indoor grow platforms. And we're just starting to see the marijuana's environmental footprint, and it's going to be damning not only when it's carbon footprint, but how much water it's using, that it's competing with your other sacred agriculture resources in your states and in the western states, and some of the stuff that's showing up that's commercially available, the toxins, banned pesticides that are really alarming that nobody's talking about. Yeah.
Well, as we leave, we have a lot of coalitions on the line, DFCs, different people in drug prevention. Can you give us some parting words as we close here with all of those who are volunteering and working in prevention? You know, what we can really do. What's one best thing that you've seen that's really working to get this out there and get this message out in our communities, besides having you come when we open COVID back up, when we're open again from COVID, and speak in there at their coalition, which you could do. But what one thing should they definitely be working on that you've seen that works?
I think one thing I tell every coalition is if you're not continuously doing an assessment of where you are and what you're doing. So we get caught, particularly our DFCs get caught in this funding cycle. And it's almost like, everything that we do is predicated on, I have to do something unique to secure my funding. And it's what I talked about, the siloing of best practices and processes. Okay. One of the things we've got to do is we got to get out of that mindset, and we've got to get into the fact that, number one, don't give up. That's the first thing. When you think about it, numbers, we have more numbers than they do. You look at 11% of this country admits to past month marijuana use. That means 89% doesn't.
Yes.
We have numbers on our side, but take a honest look at yourself, and really, why are you doing what you're doing? And at the end, do I have something that every DFC or every prevention group can benefit from? And if so, share it.
Good. I love that advice.
That we see time after time is when we do this is, have you reached out to these other DFCs in your area? No, this is my show.
All right. Thank you for that great parting wisdom. And we totally subscribe to that. We have toolkits, videos, webinars every Friday. We have a webinar. Those are absolutely free. We've all got to work together to take the things that are working for us and share them and encourage people to use them freely so that we can all help each other. Ed, I've just really enjoyed getting to know you. Honored to be on the National Marijuana Initiative Speakers Bureau. Looking forward to the fall, where hopefully we will be able to get back on planes and travel and do this really important work together. So thank you so much for being part of today and for being one of Johnny's ambassadors.
You're welcome. I'm gonna leave you with one last thing my dad used to tell me all the time. He told us, all four of us, he said, a winner isn't somebody that's never failed. A winner is somebody that never quits. And that's what I'll tell all your folks. Don't quit.
Well, we are not going to quit. I know you're not, and nobody on this call is going to quit. We are going to just keep going as hard and fast as we can.